I wanted to introduce you to my coworker, Chen, a senior software developer who also manages the SolarWinds service desk for SolarWinds. So Chen, nice to have you here.
Hey, Sean, thanks. Great to see you again. And thanks for introducing me. Hey, everyone, I'm Gretchen, and I'm a senior software engineer at SolarWinds. I'm also currently doing the admin work for our internal SolarWinds service desk.
Yeah, I've actually been working with Chen, since SolarWinds acquired the product 5 years ago. We were working very closely together to launch different processes and talk about different ways to leverage automation rules and the workflows. So we've actually been partnering quite a bit over the last several years to see the SolarWinds service desk implemented internally. It's been a lot of fun working with you.
Yeah, I remember when I started, I was introduced immediately to you because you're the expert in service desk at that time. So thanks for all the guidance with there, Sean. I really appreciate it. Years back, I remember when I started handling service desk, our heavy users are mostly IT departments, IT team. So there's help desk, request center, security team, and infrastructure and so on. So it's mostly heavily under IT.
Yeah. And even before some of our newer features, hint, where we're heading towards, even before some of those newer features, I think you had probably also helped some of the other departments or service providers work on implementing the SolarWinds service desk. And so we had a little bit of a different approach to it rather than having them use the same IT tenant. Sometimes they would adopt their own tenant and we would help them deploy it that way. Can you tell us a little bit about how that worked?
Yep, that's right. So again, when I started, it's in our internal service desk, and that's the one that's IT is using. But then I found out that there's also another instance where HR is using. So at first, it's very confusing because why are there two instances if there's just one service desk, if there's just one SolarWinds? So over time, there are teams aside from HR that are showing their interest in using service desk, just to where they can house their requests or where they can organize it. At first, okay, fine, there's legal that's coming in. So I can add legal team here and I can just add their own permission and restrictions. Because of course, for legal, what they want is they have their private tickets, and that's not going to be seen by other agents. So at first, that's fine. And then there comes different teams coming in, like marketing and parts of HR that's more handling on private tickets. And that's where it gets a bit tricky with the configuration and their roles.
So it kind of almost was natural and it made more sense to separate the tenants with their own sets of roles and permissions rather than having a ton of different roles and permissions all in one list for the one IT provider.
Yeah. And that's right. At that time, I realized, that's why HR have their own tenant because of this. It's getting a bit confusing for an admin myself and also for agents. Of course, they're not supposed to see the private data that's been worked on by HR or legal. So it made sense at that time.
So even with roles and permissions, it was still difficult to maintain a separation of data access. And so, again, they moved into their own tenant. And so now with the features that released, I'll say early of late last year, if that makes sense, ESM, Enterprise Service Management features. So with someone on here who's dealt with the trickiness of trying to manage multiple tenants or trying to manage multiple departments in a single tenant even, what is probably the best part about having the ESM feature set to you?
Oh, I can think of a lot, but I have my top three. First of all, the roles and permissions. We've already discussed that. It's really something challenging for me because I need to set up different conditions for each agent because we only have, before HR and legal came in our internal service desk, there's only one global agent role. And now that they're in there and the rest of the agents don't need to see their legal, their private tickets, I need to separate that. So that's all filtered in their different roles and permissions in Service Desk. So the best part for me, that's still top one, the roles and permissions, because with ESM, since it's just one instance, there's different service providers. So we have, let's just stick to our example of HR and legal. So we can set up HR instance or HR org and legal org in ESM, and they will have their separate roles and permission setting. So I don't need to have them configured to consider the role of a global agent from IT versus the global agent role from legal or from HR. So I can already set that privacy of their tickets just with the upgrading to ESM.
I'll agree. I think roles and permissions is probably one of the biggest, not just from managing it, but again, from the security standpoint, because while I may have Big Brother God rights in the org level of the ESM tenants, when I go into HR, I'm just a regular old requester on the portal asking for services.
Another thing, aside from the roles and permissions, is their SLAs. So that's another challenging part for me, because for SLAs, currently, what we have in Service Desk right now, we have a global SLA. So anything that I set up in there, it's going to be applied to all tickets, unless I scope it based on categories where this team or this group is working on, which I don't think is very reliable, because there's sometimes this category is going to be worked on by a different department, which the SLA, if ever I'm going to configure it on a specific category, won't be applied to that team. So with ESM, that is another problem solved for me, because I can now set up however they want their SLAs to be. So if they want an SLA to breach after 4 hours of not being resolved, I can do that. For HR, if it's going to be different, I can do that too.
To that point, you mentioned the category, and I think that's a huge thing that gets freed up. One of the asks that we had was a third level of category to kind of solve this, right? I want to start with saying it's HR, and then have categories for HR and so forth. So this really solves for that, is because now I don't have to have a category called HR. All of the categories within the HR tenant are for HR. So it really does solve quite a few issues for that. Similarly, I would say is reporting and custom field creation. You can create dedicated things per service provider now, so it doesn't have to really get that big, monstrous, hairy list of custom fields, custom forms, categories, roles and permissions all in one spot where you have to, like you said, filter through just your configuration. It's now created in the individual service provider space, so it's so much cleaner and better organized and more secure in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We call it the Tier 3 categorization because we don't want it called as a custom field because it's not being used that way. So we call it Tier 3 categorization, where there is a category of HR and there's subcategory of, let's say, benefits. And then under benefits, there's another subcategory for that, which is set up currently under dynamic forms. And now with ESM, we don't need to do that anymore. So that's going to be more cleaner and organized.
Yeah. And I want to say most recently, one of the features that we saw, which is another big benefit as we kind of overcome some of the launch anticipation for this, is not every feature was there, but something that just came out that I'm excited to talk about and see that you have also used this, if I'm not mistaken, is passing the tickets between the service providers, right? So that was an essential thing that people wanted to see as part of this, is they still want to be able to share the work. And that's something that recently just was released as well.
Yes, that's actually our main ask to our product team for us to apply it live in our production, because it's important for us that collaboration is definitely still there. I mean, it's going to look like it's just one single tenant, but of course we want tickets to be passed around on different departments. Just a good example will be for onboarding, for example. So the primary ticket will be under IT, but there will be tickets in that onboarding primary ticket that should be passed to, let's say, facilities or HR. So at first, that wasn't possible. But with this new release, it is now feasible to pass tickets from different service providers, which is really great.
So landing on the portal now at an organization level means you don't see your classic buttons of where are the tickets, where are the requests. Instead, we can give them an opportunity to transition from here to the individual service providers, where I can see IT has their very own dedicated portal. Or going back, we can see that Human Resources has their very own dedicated portal. And on these portals, we're able to submit tickets specific to that service provider. So one thing I want to note here is on the Human Resources, I can go back to Platform. On the IT, I can go back to Platform. But if I go to the Legal, then we'll be able to see that I actually can't go back to Platform. And so just to give you an explanation, back to Platform means you are an administrator or at least an agent in that service provider. So this is where we're really starting to see the main difference between I'm an agent for IT, but not an agent for legal. And I'm also an admin or agent at the organization level. So some of the other things that we had talked about was the categorization. If I go into my IT, I'll go back to my platform view, and I'll see that I have my own list under Setup, Service Desk, and Categories. I have my own list of categories here. But if we went into our Human Resources tenant and did the same thing, they have their very own list of categories, their very own setup of custom forms and fields. And because this was something that was so near and dear to your heart, Chin, the roles and permissions as well. So we can have an administrator of the HR service provider, an agent, task user, and a requester. But we don't have to have all sorts of different roles for the other folks in there, right? An IT user is a requester in the human resource tenant, and a human resource user is a requester in the IT tenant. So it keeps that list of roles for each individual service provider cleaner, right? Since they have their own safe space, they can just be an agent. And just like that, HR and IT can be agents and masters of their own domain. One of the things that organizations will ask or struggle with is adoption. And so it's really cool sometimes. And it sounds like a lot of what you do is like being a solution engineer inside the business, right? Which is pretty cool. Because a lot of what I'll do is say, hey, look how good this could be for you, right? And then they maybe like it, but then the adoption piece comes up. So have you, I guess rather not have you, what have you seen when you're talking to the business, or how are you showing the business other ways that these other service providers could leverage the tools?
It's actually easier to present service desk to them than our IT team, because it's just straightforward ticketing system. So they just want somewhere to house their requests. So for example, with the legal team and with our HR team, they're usually using just, Outlook and Teams, or just from the office, someone asking them directly for assistance. Those are their medium in getting the requests. So at the end of the day, there's no way for them to pull a report from it. How are their managers gonna know how many tasks they've resolved if that's the only way that they're gonna get it? So with Service Desk, it's easy to present it to them. So what I do is, actually, you're right, I'm like a solutions engineer for them in a way, because I'm going to present it to them how easy it is to manage their requests using our platform. So they can easily pull reports, they can filter it, they can add some categories and some categories for them.
And this is a little bit of fishing here, but what kind of feedback have you seen from the departments using the tool?
Oh, it's all positive, honestly. It's great. And again, the requests are very simple. So it's just great to see positive feedback from it because, again, from before when I started in service desk, there's just mainly IT. And now we have different teams, different departments using service desk, which means they're loving the features. They're loving how it's working. And they do have some feature requests that are eventually are being added in our platform. So thanks to our product team for that. But so far, it's all positive feedbacks because, comparing it to getting requests from Teams or from Outlook, like searching in your email, what's the last request that you got? It's still way better to have your own ticketing system, your own ticketing.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny how a tool intended for communication accidentally transformed into somehow we're using it to track our work, that being email.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
It's like, oh man, what an eye-opener that those who kind of invented service management IT have tools that we can use as service providers, right? It could be legal or HR. And now we can manage our services this way too. And guess what? The method of submission could still just be email, like you said, keeping it very simple. But now you have the ability to track, measure, report, right? In a system, whereas previously it was all just messages coming in. So this has been a great topic. And it's super cool for us to be able to say, hey, we're SolarWinds, and we're using these awesome enterprise service management features ourselves too.
Yep, that's right. And one positive feedback that I want to share is that SolarWinds Service Desk is user-friendly. That's what I've always been hearing. It's user-friendly. It's easy for them to warm up, to get used to play around with it, and to eventually introduce it to their team members to use.
What a fun and exciting opportunity to discuss using some of the features with someone internal to SolarWinds.